aren't those replacement workers? And further, I would note that the government has failed to include the federal sector employees in this legislation as part of the scope. There was 120,000 PSAC workers that went on strike. So if the government thinks this is a terrific idea, in conjunction with their NDP coalition partners, shouldn't they have said, well, you know, if it's great for everybody else, we should put that in place here? So, you know, those are just some of the considerations that went through my mind when I started to think about what we needed to do here. The other example that I would talk about would be the government taking $40 billion of taxpayer money to put into the Stellantis plant and the battery plant in St. Thomas to create 3,000 jobs, and then turn around and we find out in the contract it's going to be 1,600 Korean replacement workers. So again, the hypocrisy of the government in the way they act versus the way they bring this legislation forward makes me really ask the question whether they really do support this concept or whether they're just having to do something to pacify their NDP marriage partners. Now, one of the things that I think is missing in terms of what's in the legislation is something to do with essential workers. We've had a lot of strikes in Canada. Do you know there was 147 work stoppages alone in 2023? It's to the point where we get rail strikes, we get port strikes, we've got all these different strikes, and our partners in the US are starting to consider that Canada is not a reliable supply chain. And so there needs to be something done to address that. And I fully am behind the right to collective bargaining. I'm fully behind having people with the ability to negotiate fairly. But what's happening is people are not negotiating, and then all of a sudden at the 11th hour, the impact is felt by everyone. It's felt by businesses. When CN Rail strikes happened, you know, it's thousands and thousands of dollars to businesses. It's inconvenience to travelers in many cases. The ports, we've all seen empty shelves as a result of port strikes. And so what they do in the United States is they have legislation for essential workers. And the way it works is they define what is considered an essential service or an essential worker. So things like that are essential infrastructure for supply chain or nurses and medical professionals kind of thing. And what they put in place is they have between their terms of, let's say it's 4 years between every negotiation. 1 month before you would come into a strike action place, you would have to go to binding arbitration. And what that causes is people to get more serious about negotiating early on and not wait till the 11th hour and have an impact. Think of the parents that every year are threatened with strikes from teachers, and then all of a sudden they have no place, there's no childcare. You know, it's fine to say $10 a day childcare, but if no spaces exist, that doesn't help you. And if your kids can't go to school, that doesn't help you either. So there's huge impacts that we're missing, and I would have liked to have seen something in this legislation to address that in a similar way that they're addressed in the US. The second thing that I would say is that there's a couple of things technically that I don't think have been well considered. As I said, I worked at a chemical facility, I've worked at petrochemical facilities, I've worked with nuclears, mining sector. These are facilities that you can't just shut down on a dime. Somebody comes to the strike date and it's time to shut the thing down. It's not safe to do that. And the language in the bill talks about the only time that you could have replacement workers in the case of a strike would be if you had identified a specific harm that would occur. Now, the problem with chemical plants and nuclear facilities and whatnot when, you know, there's a strike is that you don't know exactly what thing is going to leak, catch fire, impact the environment, or whatever. Something will go wrong. You just don't know specifically what it is, and it would be impossible then to justify any replacement workers with the current phraseology. So I think that that is something that will definitely need to be addressed. And then I would say that in terms of what would be an improvement to the bill, there are ways of carving it out so that the manufacturing and transfer of substances that are covered under the transportation of dangerous goods, that would really take care of this whole area where you can't define exactly what is going to go wrong, what the impact would be. If you said exemptions could exist if there was a harm related to the manufacture or transfer of substances covered under the transportation of dangerous goods, that might be a reasonable amendment to see. And so, hopefully when this bill gets looked at, people will weigh the balance of things and try to come to a place where we're protecting the workers' right to collective bargaining. I think we need to make sure that we are protecting society and the public from, undue harm. And I think that the supply chain issue is a real and present danger. I think with the number of disruptions that we've had, we already lack capacity at our ports. We are lacking rail connectivity in this country, and it's not getting better, it's getting worse. I think between all of those kinds of disruptions, we need to find a way to incorporate essential worker, essential service as part of this legislation. And hopefully, at the end of the day, then, what we would find is that people are bargaining in good faith, they're bargaining faster. If they don't bargain in good faith, then before they're in a strike position, it goes to binding arbitration that will come to a resolution that maybe neither party will be fully satisfied with, but at least it will not be an impact to families, to Canadians, to businesses, and to our export partners. And so I look forward to the debate and listening to the ideas that my colleagues have. But certainly, as I've said, I'm from a union family. I certainly support union workers. I certainly support people's right to collectively bargain. And I've certainly been on the other side and can tell you it's no fun crossing a picket line. So, Madam Speaker, with that, I would look forward to the comments and questions from my colleagues. Thank you so much.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. And it's been many years that I've had discussions in regards to issues like anti-scab legislation, final offer selection. Actually, I can go back to 1990, a very hot 1990, very hot debating topics inside the Manitoba legislature. And I like to think that I have been a strong advocate for anti-scab legislation. And the question I have for the member is I appreciate a number of the comments that the member has said. I have to look in terms of British Columbia or Quebec to what degree public servants are incorporated into legislation. I don't necessarily know the details. I think it's a legitimate question. I'd like to see maybe it addressed better in detail as it goes to committee. But the question I have for her is the Conservative Party supporting the passage of this legislation to go into committee?
Honourable Member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker. And what I would say to the Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader, first of all, is that I did actually ask the Minister of Labour when this bill was first introduced whether or not the federal sector was included, and he indicated it wasn't. So I think that is an opportunity. If it's sauce for the goose, it should be sauce for the gander. Certainly, the Conservatives are going to take a look at what amendments are happening. As I said, there are some areas where I think the bill needs improvement, and so we'll be looking for that. And at the end of the day, we'll look forward to what happens at committee. Thank you.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagot. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have the impression that today, even though we are in favour, we've stood up for this idea 11 times, but I have the impression that we are seeing smoke and mirrors happening. And we are totally in favor of this. Since 1977, Quebec has had an anti-replacement worker law, but we have a bill before us that talks about an exception that's pretty vague for a threat to life or security. What does that mean? Is that not undermining the right to strike? We'll need to clarify that. And then the 18-month period before it comes into force after royal assent, even if it's adopted tomorrow, we wouldn't have it before the next election. So I have the impression that the Liberals, who've broken anti-scab laws a number of times, they're buying the NDP off, saying, don't worry, in 18 months, the Conservatives will take it off the table once they're in power. Does my colleague share that opinion? The Honourable Member for Sarnia-Lambton. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you for the question. The member knows that I worked hard to put in place a bill to protect pensions for unions, for other workers. So I want to have a bill that is strong, but there are problems. I will say that I agree with the elimination of the 18-month period. Because if something is good, it's good immediately. So that is my opinion. Thank you.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for North Island, Powell River.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm just waiting for the mic to turn on. I thank the member for her speech. I found it really interesting. I don't necessarily agree with all the points, and I think she may be confused on a few issues. But I know the facts are that anti-scab legislation has existed in Quebec and British Columbia for quite a long time. And as my friend said earlier, the sky hasn't fallen. So I hear all of these conservative arguments that are really catastrophic. But we know that so many people in this country want to have their labor matter, so that when scabs walk in, it takes away their power to negotiate. This is what this is. So I'm just wondering if this member is going to support this moving forward, and if we're going to see maybe some ideas that they want to bring forward. But at the end of the day, I hope that every party in this House supports workers.
For Sarnia Lambton.
Well, absolutely, Madam Speaker. As I said, I do support workers, and I do support people's right to collectively bargain. What I have a problem with is when people don't come to the table in good faith, and things go on, and all of a sudden there's impacts to Canadian families, to Canadian businesses, to our export partners, and things that could be eliminated. So I think there are better ways of doing it. I think we need to look to other countries that do it better. And I'm very interested to hear in the legislation in Quebec about what exactly they've done, because I know that there are some facilities, like chemical facilities, et cetera, that would need that kind of protection. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Before we resume debate, the honourable member for Edmonton West is rising on a point of order.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate the opportunity to try this again, that if the House gives its consent, I move that the 14th report of the Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates, the mighty OGO, presented to the House earlier this day be concurred in.
Hear, hear. Hear, hear.
All those opposed to the honourable member moving the motion will please say nay. La Chambre a entendu les...
The House has heard the terms of the motion. All those who are opposed will please say nay.
Adopté.
Carried.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you,
Oh, no,
Speaker.
no, désolé.
I'm sorry.
L'honorable...
The honourable member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. I went a little too quickly. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm sorry. I'm sure my colleague will make an excellent speech just after me. I'm sorry to be taking her spot. She was expecting to make a speech that we will listen to carefully after mine. So before I begin, I'd like to highlight something that happened over the weekend, which hasn't been mentioned in this House yet. An important event, an artistic event. I know it might not seem related, but I'll show you how it is. And it's important to note it. Over the weekend, 2 Quebecers won prizes internationally in film. Monia Choukri, yes, it's important to highlight this. Monia Choukri with Simple comme Sylvain, which won the César for the best foreign film at the César ceremony in Paris on Saturday evening, which beat, can you imagine, it beat Oppenheimer. It beat Oppenheimer. So it was a sentimental comedy by a Quebecer, a producer. She's worked with Xavier Dolan, and in Paris, she won big. People were surprised, but once again, Quebec abroad is doing very well. Its works are being seen everywhere, and in Berlin, Saturday evening as well. Philippe Lesage, a 40-something producer, he's got a few titles under